Hey guys, so welcome to the second week of Virtual Rooted. We are now on the ground and running with this, and maybe we've had a few bumps in the road, and we might still have a few bumps in the road as we move forward, but we're doing our best. We're gonna get the kinks worked out, as this is what we gotta do for the time being, and that's okay, because we can adapt. As God's people, we have faith that He is in control and we can adapt to this. So, a couple of announcements as we kick this off for this week. First announcement is that right now, well, when I'm filming this, it's Tuesday right now. The weather is absolutely beautiful. Spring is technically here. We might get more snow as time moves on. Come on, it's Minnesota. But honestly, the weather is great. And I encourage you guys to get outside. Even though we are on a stay-at-home order, you can go outside, you can go for a walk, you can go on a bike ride. Of course, you guys just need to talk to your parents. Make sure you have permission to do that from your parents first. Second announcement, I mentioned last week that we are going to do a trip to Wild Mountain. They have go-karts, alpine slides, they have a water park and a lazy river, and they have lots of awesome stuff like that at Wild Mountain. Even though it's a ski place, they're open in the summer. So the plan right now is to do that in June. You know, with an ever-changing situation, we might not be able to go in June. So if it's not June, it's going to be this summer. So the Wild Mountain trip, don't have details because I can't plan too much right now, but I just want to put that on your radar. Make sure that you guys are aware of that. And the second announcement is the Bigger or Better scavenger hunt. Since we did not do that this year due to all this stuff, we are going to do that this summer. Again, details and the date and the time of that is to be determined, TBD, but we are going to get that done this summer. And we're also going to start Summer Rooted, hopefully in June, if we can do it in June. Otherwise, we're going to have to move it to later in the summer, but we are going to have Summer Rooted. So stay tuned also for details about that. But I want you guys to be looking forward to these things. I want you to be excited about these things. And if you did not get your photo in for the funny picture challenge, make sure to send that to me right now, as long as it's before noon if you're watching this. If it's afternoon and it's Wednesday, then sorry, you're out of luck. It's already been posted. So the format for tonight is going to be the same now. So what you're going to do next is the screen is going to change to prompt you to read Ruth chapter 2. When you guys are done reading Ruth chapter 2, start the video back up again and listen to the sermon. Go through it, keep your Bible out as you go along. And then after that, you guys are going to be meeting with your leaders. Now that could be a different time for each of you in your small groups with your leader, and how you meet could be different. It could be Zoom, it could be Google Hangout. However, you guys are going to meet virtually with your leader. If you have not heard from your leader and you are watching this, please contact them. If you don't know how to contact them, contact me. If you don't know how to do that, talk to your parents and we will get in touch to make sure that you guys are going to be connecting with your leaders on a weekly basis. The beginning of the rest of the school year is here. And what I mean by that is the routine that all of you are going to be going through, the day-to-day activities, what life is going to look like. It's really just beginning, and now that you guys are back this week with doing online schooling and moving forward with that. And as we're adjusting, no doubt a lot of us are thinking, I want things to go back to the way they were. And we have to adapt. We have to adapt what our days look like. We have to adapt how we do our schoolwork. We have to adapt how we do our work, who we can see, what we can do, where we can go and when, all those types of things. And not because we want to adapt, but because we have to adapt. Because ultimately, we're not in control. We're not in control of this. You and I, all of us, everyone here at Cornerstone, everyone in Owatonna, we have no control over these things. And really, it's the whole world is kind of in the same boat right now. But because we don't have that control, and because there is one who does, there's something we need to do, how our faith needs to adapt. And I don't mean our faith needs to change because it's only in one person, it's Jesus, but how we carry out our faith, how we do this thing called church has to adapt. And you guys are the church. And how we need to adapt and how we need to think about all this going forward is just something that's going to be the reality, and adapting all things in our lives during this season right now.
And the reality is that when things change drastically, when things change so drastically and sometimes so quickly, we question. We question, why does it have to be this way? Why can't things be like it was before? And that's normal. And oftentimes, a lot of us, many of you may have asked these types of questions, but we say, why can't it be like before? And why didn't God prevent it? You know, if God's really in control, because he's the one who's in control, then why didn't he stop it? Why didn't he stop it? Because now I can't do X, Y, and Z, and that makes this not happen, and this not happen, and now I'm bored, now I'm feeling lonely, and I'm struggling with this. Because that's the reality, is that a lot of you are bored out of your minds. A lot of you are stressed. A lot of you are anxious. A lot of you don't know what to do with your time. You're starting to feel like you're going crazy, and that's bringing on things like depression and anxiety, and those things are very, very real, and they're happening to a lot of people. But when we begin to feel these things, what can happen is this: when we leave those things unchecked, it can begin to have our faith in God, our faith in his control, and how we carry out his will for our lives in jeopardy. It can bring that trust in him to a halt. And maybe we're not thinking in our brains, oh, I'm not trusting God anymore, but that's what happens. And we don't even realize it. And tonight, now you guys hopefully have read chapter 2 of Ruth, but now we're going to look in Ruth 2 and look how we can work through these difficult circumstances. So I think there's some awesome stuff we're going to see from the book of Ruth, some really, really, really cool stuff, and to see how we can navigate through difficult times. So before we dive straight into Ruth chapter 2, a quick recap of Ruth chapter 1. So if you didn't see the video from last week, or you just forgot or whatnot, Ruth chapter 1 basically is the story, is that there was this family. There's this family, God's people, living in the land of Israel, and there's a famine, so there's no food. Like, they're going to die. So they go to Moab, which is basically the country to the southeast. And the Moabite people in the land of Moab, are enemies of God's people. They don't get along. They are enemies, but they go there to find relief, to find food. And Naomi is the mom in the family, and her husband dies. And her sons had married Moabite women, but then her sons die. So then it's just Naomi and now her 2 daughters-in-law. And Naomi hears that there's food back in Israel. So she's trying to go back to her home after 10 years. And she tells her daughters-in-law, just don't come with me. I'm old. I don't have husband. I don't have sons for you. Even if I had a husband tonight and I could bear you sons in a year's time, you're going to wait till they grow up to marry them? No, go home. But Ruth, one of the 2 women, says, I'm going to stay with you. I'm going to stick it out with you. I'm going to go to your family and your land, and your God will be my God. And they go back to the land of Israel, where Naomi came from. God's people, the promised chosen land. And then that's where chapter 2 picks up. So chapter 2 of the book of Ruth basically has 3 different sections to it. So you can even break a short chapter like this down into 3 sections. But the first section is basically this. Once they're back in Israel, Naomi tells Ruth, hey, I have this relative, and his name is Boaz, and he has fields, and he has workers in those fields, and you should go glean that field. And basically to glean a field was to go out into these fields and pick up the grains that were left over in the field and collect them. So that they could have food. And she tells Ruth, go to his fields and find him, and see if you can glean from his fields, because he's our relative. He's our relative. And they talk about it for a little bit. Second section, she goes, and Ruth actually ends up going straight to one of Boaz's fields, but she didn't know it was his. See, they had that conversation, and when she ends up in the field of Boaz, she didn't know whose it was. And the Bible tells us that she happened to come across Boaz's field. So she goes and she works really hard all day long. And she works really hard, and eventually Boaz invites her to come eat with him and his servants. And that's kind of like a big deal. This foreigner, a woman on her own, and he invites her to come eat, and he gives her enough food to where she gets full, and she has enough food left over. And they had talked a little bit in between there as well. And then the last section of this chapter, she goes back home to Naomi, brings the food, and she tells Naomi, hey, I actually came across Boaz. I was in his field. He let me work. He told the people not to harm me and to protect me. And then Naomi says, hey, great. I want you to keep going back to his field, because you will be protected if you go and keep working in his fields. And we know from doing some different studies that she actually ended up working in that field probably for about 6 or 7 weeks' time. Now, the book of Ruth doesn't have these big commands jumping out of the passage like pray continually, where Paul writes in 1 Thessalonians, or love one another and give yourself in service to the Lord. We don't have those types of commands and passages. It's a story. It's a true historical story. So sometimes we can read through it and think, oh, wow, that's an awesome story. But you have to dig a little deeper when you want to see, well, what does God want to tell me through this story? What is he trying to teach me, and what am I supposed to do as a result of this story? And there really are some amazing things in this story. So if you do have a Bible, please keep it out. We're going to look at Ruth 2 right now. So if you need to get a Bible out, pause right now and get the Bible out and look at Ruth chapter 2. And I'm going to read verses 2 and 3. And it says this: Now Naomi had a relative of her husband's, a worthy man of the clan of Elimelech, whose name was Boaz. And Ruth the Moabite said to Naomi, Let me go to the field and glean among the ears of grain after him in whose sight I shall find favor. And so she said to her, Go, my daughter. So she set out and went and gleaned in the field after the reapers, and she happened to come to the part of the field belonging to Boaz, who was the clan of Elimelech. And the key phrase there that we need to see is, and she happened to come to the part of the field belonging to Boaz. Now, the story doesn't ever say this at any point. It doesn't ever make a direct mention of this, but it's clear when you read the whole book that she didn't just happen. It wasn't just happenstance. It wasn't just a coincidence that she came to this. God was providentially leading her specifically to that field because he had a plan, and we'll see this plan unfold over the next 2 weeks. So when it says she happened to, it's using that specifically to make us pause and think, she happened to come by. And then the question we need to ask is, why did she just happen to come by that field? And in fact, there are many, many instances in the Bible where we have events and different things happening that seem to they just were a coincidence, they just happened. But yet we look, and the Bible tells us, and we can see, such as Ruth chapter 2 right here, that God was directing it. There is so much in this world, in this life, things that happen that aren't just happening, but God is directing it behind the scenes. And we normally don't think about it, but we normally see it after the fact. We look back after the whole thing and be like, wow, God, if that hadn't happened, then this wouldn't have happened, and this wouldn't have happened. And one of the biggest examples of that is the creation of the people of Israel to begin with, where God calls Abraham and his descendants after many generations, or a few generations, and eventually you have Joseph, where Joseph was sold into slavery by his brothers. And that eventually led him to become the ruler, second in command in Egypt, and thus the Israelite family was preserved and became all of the nation of Israel today, all of the Jews today. And it wouldn't have happened if Joseph's brothers hadn't have sold him into slavery. But you can imagine, Joseph had a pretty tough life for many, many years after being sold into slavery as a slave in Egypt. But at the end of all of this, he's talking to his brothers, and he says this, and Joseph says, You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. Genesis 50:20. And when he says the saving of many lives, because of what happened to me, many lives are saved, he meant literally physical lives being saved, because they were in a famine in Egypt. And because of what Joseph did by God putting him there, many lives were saved and got food of what he did to prepare for the famine. But when you read the whole of Genesis, it becomes clear that it's not just that. It actually extends out to spiritual lives being saved. Because the gospel, Galatians says, was preached through Abraham, and that through Abraham's seed, his descendants, the gospel would come to the whole world, ultimately through Jesus. And because the descendants of Abraham came through that family, Joseph's family, ultimately, many lives have been saved because of that. So really, it's both the literal and the spiritual. Lives are being saved forever in heaven because of that event. And in the same way, Ruth happening to come to Boaz's field is a clear sign and clear indication that God directed it that way, ultimately because he was going to bless Ruth. And we'll see that unfold in the coming weeks as we get to chapters 3 and 4 in the next 2 weeks. And while we're not experiencing a famine right now in Owatonna, right now in Minnesota, in the United States, and the whole world, while we're not necessarily, at least here, experiencing a famine and experiencing things as bad as it was for them, we are going through a difficult time. Difficult things are happening to so many of us right now because of this virus in this season. And it pauses us to stop and to say, God, again, why do you allow this? Why can't things just be how they were? God, I don't understand. If you're in control, what are you doing? But Boaz, when he's talking to Ruth says to him, like, why are you giving me protection? Why are you allowing me in this field? Why are you allowing me to glean these fields? And then he then says this. Boaz says, all that you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband has been fully told to me. When you left your father and mother in your native land and you came to a people that you did not know before, the Lord repay you for what you have done, and a full reward be given you by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge. Now, this really is such an incredible and a shocking thing to happen, because Ruth, likely with no Old Testament knowledge, because many books of the Old Testament, or at least a few, were in existence, God's word was in existence and being taught, she likely didn't have that knowledge because she's a Moabite woman who doesn't live in Israel, but she came there. But yet the faith she expresses in a God she has not grown up with is so incredible. And when we sit here today, those of you watching this have had full access to all of Scripture. And many of you have been attending church for a long time and been taught by myself and so many other leaders and teachers and pastors about who God is and His love and His plan for us. She had nothing, and we really have so much, but yet the faith she showed in God's control in the midst of that is incredible. So where is your faith right now? Where is your faith in the COVID-19 pandemic season of life in this world? Is your faith like Ruth's faith? This faith that seems to be so strong despite she doesn't seem to have all this, we could call it church experience in the background. She gave up her family, she gave up her land, her relatives, her customs, her religion, and came to cling to Naomi and cling to Yahweh, the Lord, the one true God that she had not known before. Where are you in your faith? Where has it been? Has it changed in this season? And honestly, we need to ask, what is God calling you to give up in this season? Maybe what this God is trying to show you, and all of us different things, but for you, maybe He's trying to show you that you need to trust Him instead of in yourself to get by day, where we need to lean on Him. We're saying, I'm so bored and I'm going crazy, and God's saying, great, talk to me. Lean on me. Trust in me to get you through the day and not your ability to keep yourself entertained. What is it for you? What is God calling you to give up? And what is God calling you to do, take a step of faith to be more like Ruth in this time and the faith that she has put in the Lord? You guys, I believe God is going to do amazing things despite this virus. Despite all the bad things that are happening. I always think of the story of Ruth with this, and now I'm thinking of Joseph, as I shared, about how God works behind the scenes when things can seem so bad, but yet He brings about such amazing and beautiful results in the midst of what seems to be terrible. Well, it is terrible things, but what seems to be so only terrible things in our eyes. I believe that fully, and I trust it fully. Doesn't mean I'm perfect in my trust, but where are your thoughts? Where is your faith? And where are you right now? So the first thing from this text today, from this chapter of the book of Ruth, is God's control and our faith that we need to trust that He's working behind the scenes. And just because we can't see good things coming out of this right now, there are. And we need to have a faith and trust in that control. And the second thing I want to draw out of this chapter today is simply this idea of love and kindness. And it's really in one main verse. But first I want to read verse 4 to get a foundation for this. So look at Ruth 2, verse 4. And it says this, "And behold, Boaz came from Bethlehem. And he said to the reapers, 'The Lord be with you.' And they answered, 'The Lord bless you.'" So what we see here is Boaz. He has people working for him, working in his fields. And he's the boss. and he's treating them really, really well. Where he's saying, Yahweh bless you, the Lord bless you, and they're like, God bless you too. What we see here is there's a good relationship between Boaz and his workers. They respect each other and they like each other, and that is not a common thing. And unfortunately, sometimes even today, it's not that common of a thing. But verse 1 says that he was a worthy man. And that's really why there's this respect and this kindness between him and his workers. And they both have a relationship, he and his workers, where they're saying, God bless you, the Lord bless you. And it's because the text says he was a worthy man. Now, as we move on, actually it's in chapter 3, we'll see this next week, but Ruth is actually called a worthy woman, a woman of outstanding character. Both of them being worthy, ultimately, is because how they treat other people. They got a reputation for being outstanding people who love and care for others. And in verse 20, we read this. We read, and Naomi said to her daughter-in-law, may he, Boaz, be blessed by the Lord, whose kindness, there's the key word, has not forsaken the living or the dead. Naomi also said to her, the man is a close relative of ours, one of our redeemers. She says, because of his kindness. Now, the Hebrew word, because the Old Testament was originally written in Hebrew, the word behind kindness is chesed. So now all of you at home listening to this right now, you all need to do this out loud, really loud, so everybody else, whether they're in the room or they're by, say it really loud. 1, 2, 3, chesed, chesed. You got to get that throat going. And I think I've said this before, but chesed love is an unfailing love. If the Bible ever says God has an unfailing love, in the Old Testament, it's this word chesed. So God's chesed love, and here in verse 20, it said that Boaz has shown kindness. He has shown chesed for the living and the dead. The word can be translated in many ways, and here it's used to say kindness, but it's the same type of love that God has for his people. A merciful love, a covenantal love, a giving love, a love that extends a hand out in kindness to others, even when they don't deserve it. And it is this chesed love that you and I, as believers in Jesus Christ, are called to show to other people. It's not just, oh, you should love other people. You should show them chesed love. It's a command. In fact, in the New Testament, in the book of John chapter 13, verses 34 and 35, Jesus tells his disciples, he's like, hey, you know how the world is going to know that you're a Christian? You want to know how the world is going to know that you are a follower of me? He says, by the love you express for each other, and out from that, the love you show is going to be the determining factor. Relationships are the glue of everything we know, because God has made us as relational people, and the foundation of those relationships is the love the chesed love he has shown us, and that chesed we are called to show to other people. So then we have these two things. We have this, in the midst of chaos, we need to trust that God is working. He's in control. Things don't just happen. Coincidences. God is controlling it. And secondly, showing love and kindness to other people. And the question then becomes, okay, in difficult, not just difficult times, but especially in difficult times, how do we do these two things? And I'm going to call these two things as being doing what we need to do. Do the right thing. Just do what you need to do. And I think these two things are things that we need to do right now, trusting in him and showing love and kindness to other people. Because you know what? Our world denies that he is in control. It does all the time. So how can you start to trust if your faith is like, well, you know what? I want to trust him, but I don't feel that in my heart. I'm going to give you two things for that. Number one, start to recognize that his hand is in all things. Just start to think about it. Just sit down and quiet and start to think about how God is in control of all things and what the Bible says. And then as you do that, I want you to begin to thank him for everything in your life. Thank him for your bed, your pillows, your blanket, the clothes you have, the heat that's in your house, the windows so there's not wind coming in your house. Think about and thank him for your toothbrush and your toothpaste and your comb, or your shampoo and your conditioner and the water pressure so the water can get to you with the water pressure and the soap, and just start going through the list. And the more we are thankful, it's amazing how we begin to trust him. Give thanks and do that more and more and more. And here's a challenge for you. This is the ultimate challenge for this point. Only use or consider it that you can use it that day. And I've said this before, but we're going to do it again. Everything that you give thanks for. So if you didn't give thanks for it yet in that day, you can't use it. Or you can make it harder and say if you didn't give thanks for it in the morning, then you can't use it for the rest of the day. If you didn't give thanks for water, great. No water for the rest of the day. That can get dangerous, so you might as well give thanks for the water right away in the beginning of the day. But that's a great exercise to do, to begin to help us to trust in his sovereignty more and more. And the second part of that is just pray. Pray God would increase your faith and trust in his control and to get you through the day, because he will do that and he will honor that prayer, I promise. So then the second part of that is the chesed love, showing love and kindness to others. You know what? When Ruth decided to take care of Naomi and go glean those fields, she was taking incredible risk upon herself. And I'm not advocating that you guys run out of your houses and do things that can put you at risk like that. But what I am saying is that we as the church need to be showing chesed to others, love and kindness, because you are the church, if indeed your faith is in Jesus Christ. So to do that, I think one of the best things that you can do is your family. Look at your family, think about your family, especially those of you who have brothers and sisters, and think, what can I give to them? How can I serve my brothers and sisters? And your parents, of course, too, but sometimes it's hardest with our siblings, which is why I say it that way. How can I serve them? How can I be there for them? You know, there's one dessert left and only one of you can get it and the two of you want it. Give it to your sibling. Show them love. Show them kindness. Serve them. Give to them. We are called to do this, especially to those closest to us, our family and our close friends. And another idea that came to mind is something I think is very powerful and is very much needed, especially during a quarantine time like this. Send messages. And I don't mean electronic messages because we're used to getting those, but what we're not used to is going to be more of an effect. Send people who are lonely, who are depressed, who need encouragement. Send them handwritten notes. It can be such a powerful, powerful thing to encourage other people. Send them notes. Send your mom or your dad a handwritten note saying how you're thankful that they're taking care of you, that they're giving you food, that they have given you a home and water and a bed and all that type of stuff. And I think if you can do those things, you'll be amazed at how God begins to work through your heart. He will help you to trust him more and more, and how he is going to bless you in this time. Because the story of Ruth, especially this chapter, shows us that peace and trust in him is very much possible in the midst of chaotic, societally difficult times, when society is going crazy and there's turmoil and there's struggle in our world, because their world was crazy struggles. But yet there was peace and well-being because God's hand was at work. God took care of them, and he calls us to these things. So I want to encourage you tonight for this week, do what you need to do. Trust in God and display chesed to other people.